All right, welcome back, everyone. We are at our 3 o'clock session. Just to let you know that for our 3 o'clock session, we've got Kyle Bess. His presentations on perspective and opportunity costs for cyber attack. Kyle, major turned cybersecurity analyst turned software engineer. Sounds like the story of a lot of us. Just turned a lot of things. His perspective from a non-traditional background aids in his ability to expand his frame of reference. He's self-taught with code. Raise your hand if that's you. I think that's all of us. While studying the analytics, finance, and accounting to equip himself with the tools to draw better insights for a data-rich industry. So what exactly are opportunity costs? This is what Kyle's going to be telling you about. It's a concept that most have a tangible understanding of. The opportunity cost of a cyber attack could be an astronomical amount as you start to hemorrhage resources to triage where you could have been conducting business as usual. So with no further ado, Kyle, the floor is yours, my friend.
Hello, and thank you so much for that warm and welcome introduction. That is my desktop. There we are. So yeah, as I was just introduced, I do come from a traditionally business background, and then I started to teach myself a lot of the technicalities behind our industry because I found it so fascinating. I think the most valid thing that I'm sure everyone around me has heard at some point in time or another was the moment that I realized I wanted to get into tech was when I heard, coming from a finance background, that there was a quantitative hedge fund that was using satellite data on weather predictions to measure the price of measure the amount of water in wells to predict the pricing on oil commodities, which just so over my pay grade and so over engineered that I don't even want to attempt to understand what it is. But beginning my talk, this is about the opportunity cost of cyber attacks on developing nations. It is going to get into economics at the very, very most high level you can. It's going to be about as in-depth as an intro economics course would ever get in an undergrad situation, but here we are. So what qualifies me? Not a whole lot. As I said, I am a jack of very few trades and certainly a master of none. These are my hobbies: guitar, reading, mechanical keyboards, cycling, and cooking. So we're going to go ahead and get into it. So the narrow concentration of attacks. So my first point with this is mainly centered around whenever a 0-day goes out or some form of exploit comes up, the first reaction that nearly everyone has, including media, including security analytics experts, including everyone in our industry, is how is this going to affect business? Which is a very valid concern. Don't get me wrong. Even the 4 companies on the left have had an astronomical impact on society and business in the 21st century and 20th century alone. And that's a valid concern from any perspective. However, my talk is going up about something different. Basically, what I mean by it's a valid perspective is, as you know, Facebook owns Instagram and Facebook themselves, and these are the platforms nowadays that culture is even expressed through. So if a platform like that was to go down, then we lose a lot of the ways that we actually communicate and a lot of the ways that have kept us sane alone in the last year. So like I'm saying, it's not typically the smaller players in the picture, but those of whom lead industries and or many of us rely upon. So you have the crazy big companies like Goldman, but no one's focusing on the hospitals that have Windows XP and everything like that, that can't necessarily be as agile to move around and instantly update all of their systems. So we're going to go ahead and move to the next slide. A local Oldsmar Florida. A lot of people are going to remember this because it really was not even that long ago. I believe there was the RDP on the network managed to get in, and they attempted, thankfully not successfully, to increase the amount of lye in the water supply. So those bullet points are basically the effects that lye would potentially have. I went through a couple medical websites, but unfortunately that is not one of my areas of expertise. From 100 parts per million to over 11,000. That was the attempt. So my main rationale for including this slide was, if it were to happen in what would be considered one of the most, if not the most developed nations in the 21st century, what about others? What about other companies that don't have as great of infrastructure as some of our biggest proponents of the economy have? So it's always something to think about, where I feel like a lot of the focus goes towards, all right, what would happen to Microsoft or Google or Facebook if this were to get out, and not what would happen to the smaller players. One of the smaller players in this example being a water treatment facility that a lot of people wouldn't think, oh, this is how I affect a nation. The cost of an outage. This is tying back to a little bit of what I said. So the cost of an outage of a singular company. I'm sure a lot of us remember a couple months ago, Google went down for just over an hour. YouTube was down, Gmail is down. Now, Google search was not down, which is their major proponent of driving revenue. So that wasn't their most ambitious business model, did not go down, but $2.3 million alone for one of the examples of one of the larger players actually going down in the 21st century. This is, again, what I'm talking about, how culture is expressed. You have, let alone how productive you are in a system. So Gmail is absolutely gigantic. I'm sure all of us receive multiple things of spam every day. YouTube, entertainment, that's the lack thereof of productivity. Google Drive, having an integrated place for storage, Google Meet, Google Docs, tools that have become even more essential during the pandemic and over this last year, where a lot of our work has to be collaborative. I mean, you have Google Docs and Dropbox and things of that nature, but this is, again, one of my focuses on how impactful like a 0 day can be. But again, this is a focus on one of the larger companies, whereas this is going to be turned more into a talk of what could happen potentially for a smaller player. Opportunity cost. This is starting to get into the economics of why I'm saying that a lot of this is pretty commonplace. So opportunity cost, in short, is the loss of potential gain from alternatives when another alternative is chosen. Before I get into the context of cyber, we're first going to just look at you can see the Napkin Finance example of it, but especially like in high school, you're like, oh, well, I worked all week, I can go to a concert. The cost of that concert is $70 in addition to the amount of revenue that you would gain from working that night. So applying this to cyber tax, the investment into development of infrastructure or other areas. So you choose to forego the amount that you would put into higher security, so and even training, so that Oldsmar incident would never happen, and you would never have a port like that was exposed to the open internet that someone could exploit so easily. But you would have something that wouldn't even sum up the cost that you were investing in another area, but it would be the sum of the cost that you invested into another area in addition to the potential breach. So the amount of costs associated with the hospital bills that could have potentially happened if the Oldsmar incident went through and our water source was contaminated with 111,000 or whatever the figure was, amount of lye parts per million, that is also tying into the cost that they forgo to invest in things like infrastructure and other places. It's kind of what that second point is tying to. How do nations compete? This is going more into the economic theory again. Again, this all links back to cybersecurity, I promise. So comparative advantage, the ability of an individual or group, particular economic activity, more effectively than any other activity in the context of security. Who has comparative advantage, and why is it nations with top universities? So this is kind of tongue in cheek. I think the answer is relatively clear. These top universities have been everyone's go-to for producing skilled labor all throughout the 20th century, and even they're a landmark of our industry in the 21st century. Whereas a lot of people think that the only path to a career, regardless of wherever it may be, is a 4-year degree or even associates with certifications. So comparative advantage has been focused university, they also get the human capital. America gets the human capital of the people that are filtering in to go to these universities in order to run all of their integrated systems.
We are actively working with Kyle, trying to get him on, folks. So please bear with us. I turned my mic on and let the group know that we're working with you, bud.
All right, can you guys hear me again? All right. Hello again. sorry for whatever that may have been. There we go. I hope you guys can actually hear me now.
Yeah,
Again,
we can hear you and we see the presentation. Go ahead, Kyle.
all right, fantastic. Do you know about where it was before it kicked me out?
Why don't you go ahead and start going through your slides, dude?
Okay. So I don't really know what point we were at.
Yeah, keep on going.
Here?
No. Keep on going.
I think we're at like one of the last slides. I think it was this one.
No.
Oh, so Chris says back industrial. Chris, we'll just continue from where they say.
Right there, dude.
Okay, awesome. So again, sorry for whatever happened. Again, I blame Spectrum Internet. But I guess we'll go over all my points again. But how do nations compete in the 21st century? It's all against imports, exports, and trade. So comparative advantage, again, touching upon a pretty basic principle in all of economics. So one person, we're back to your patient cycle. So especially a nation that specializes in one particular thing is going to be stronger and typically play to those strengths rather than trying to kind of fortify their weaknesses. So in the context of security, who has comparative advantage and why is it nations with top universities? This is kind of tongue-in-cheek because it's obviously the answer of the people who have top universities. So you have things that are even as highly regarded as the Ivy League in terms of the United States. You have Oxford, you have Cambridge, you have all of these ridiculously massive research universities who fund these programs with cutting edge technology, but a lot of the times that's difficult for those with not much funding to get a hold of. I mean, you have Harvard with an over $30 billion endowment that can cash flow the implementation of machine learning to security all day long. But those organizations and countries that don't necessarily have access to talent from these top universities often suffer because of that. You don't have the same amount of talent pool that you can draw from. You have people who have never even used the technology versus some of the people who have built it on your team. So again, we're going to go into the next point, but one of the greatest things about this pandemic, unfortunately, has been how it has absolutely revolutionized the learning framework. And it's been happening for years now, but fourth industrial revolution. and the opportunities that present itself. So some economists theorize that we are currently in a period deemed to be the fourth industrial revolution. Rather than the output of being tangible goods, the service economy presents an incredible opportunity for countries looking to increase GDP. So a lot of people don't really realize the sheer amount of impact that the other revolutions have had on us in general. So the summers that we were so fond of as kids, going from like K through 12, were only because those people who were able-bodied the fields and reproduce and work amongst people that needed the extra productivity rather than being in school. There was even research done to being shown as to why that was how classrooms were organized. It's absolutely immense. But the fourth industrial revolution and this theoretical period that we're in currently is all because it's not so much a focus on tangible goods, as I stated beforehand, and we're not forming assembly lines to make cars. That's not no longer cutting edge technology. We're now focusing on the development of STEM and software as a service products and trying to build ourselves from the ground up to be an economy and to be a nation and a world entirely that can teach these at a lower level so that whenever kids get to a higher level like college and high school, they're already able to apply themselves in pragmatic like software development. That will absolutely revolutionize how we do things. And you think software as a service products are great in number now, you're only going to see them increase. So a lot of this can be shown in like after school programs now focusing more on STEM, universities even pushing it. IT is going to be one of the most expanding fields in the 21st century, as you can see by like the US labor and job markets reports. So how can other countries do this that don't have access to it? So this is going into overcoming barriers to entry. So unfortunately, in the past, barriers to entry have been absolutely immense. Like I was saying earlier, in lieu of like a 4-year degree nowadays, you have some people who don't even have a bachelor's, but are still finding their way into top companies and organizations because they have the skills. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a piece of paper associated with your name, but you have alternative means of education now, which has significantly reduced the barrier to entry. You have Security Plus and even Google Analytics and stuff like that, which can show you that you have industry-specific skills that aren't necessarily built on a foundation of public speaking and professional writing and other preliminary courses that you're going to have to take for your major at a 4-year university. You're getting straight into the meat and potatoes. So companies like Coursera especially have been known to be pretty prevalent in this matter. I mean, you can see even in the background, they're offering UPenn, Yale, Duke, PwC, top accounting firm, Princeton, Google, University of Illinois, Northwestern. All of these top colleges are now dispersing all of their learning material for those at a more affordable price. Like I can take a UPenn course for $50 rather than paying $65,000 in tuition. So with such easy access to learning materials, now you're going to have some of the people that are easily looking into these things from high school, and they come into an industry at 18 or 20 before they would have even graduated undergrad with more practical skills for the technologies that are going to be in demand for the 21st century. And that alone, and all you really need is an internet connection, a laptop, and some grit, and you're more than fine. But barriers to entry in the software space are a little bit more difficult because you have such large players. Like no one's going to come and be the next Google. No one's going to index the entire internet and then be the greatest search engine, because once you get to certain scales, Google draws off of the data and the searches that they get. That's how they tune their algorithms. That's how they tune their models. You're never going to get to that level of production, but there are alternative industries that can be started for that don't have even many players in them. So open source software is cool. Even Amazon uses Elasticsearch to their chagrin. Amazon used Elasticsearch a crazy amount, to the point where Elasticsearch revised their entire business model just to try to remove some of the profitability that AWS was having. But open source software is absolutely incredible. I know I don't really have to praise it that much, especially in the audience that I currently have. Open source software could be accredited for industry-leading company for keeping in any industry-leading company ticking. Not only do they rely, but they often open source a lot of their software. So Google, they've even open sourced Golang, which is an incredible language. Couldn't recommend it enough. You have Facebook with React and GraphQL, which power a lot of our internet today. GraphQL, a lot of people don't know, that was the entire kind of bread and butter behind how they got their mobile app to work, because it was just a complicated mess with integrating their web frameworks and web technologies into some of their mobile tech. Thanks to a couple engineers at GraphQL, they eventually open source this project. And even the company I work at, ReliQuest, right now uses a bunch of open source technology, including GraphQL. Goldman Sachs, data modeling software, one of the biggest players in finance today. Nowadays, you have them going through not only the investment banking channels that they were so prevalent in, but now they're kind of starting to hit into like the credit card industry with Apple cards. So what does any of this have to do with the development of security for smaller nations? What you see on the right there looks like a SIM. It is. That's an open source SIM. That's one of my suggestions for companies that, or for the countries that don't have these $1 to $2 million budgets even annually to get something even as simple as like a logarithm or a Splunk or a QRadar or an ArcSight. They can't afford that. And as long as they have, to a degree, a couple log sources actually putting into the SIM, you have at least one platform to start measuring by. So solutions for affecting smaller nations. Again, I'm going to touch more on the open source side, but international organizations like the United Nations have some things, the Office of Counterterrorism, where larger countries actively donate to support strengthening against cyber attacks and other forms of terrorism. So you have countries within the United Nations donating like immense amounts. And when I was doing research leading up to this, you have even Saudi Arabia donating like $110 million annually to help support against these types of things. So the first step in the right direction, in my opinion, is getting people to, getting developing countries to an extent where they know that their infrastructure is not going to be completely taken down by whatever the newest form of exploit is. Unfortunately, that's not as easy as it sounds, and that's why I was talking about a reliance on international organizations, where they would have immense amounts of funding, where some would not. It's hard to completely be as agile as even 21st century companies nowadays, because you don't necessarily have in the budget to migrate all of your servers from X version to Y version and hardware issues related. So this is where the development of alternative courses like Coursera become immensely beneficial for education. No longer do you necessarily have to rely on the insular Ivy Towers, as they always say. You now have human capital at any place in any country, again, with internet, a computer, and some grit. You can teach yourself practically anything. There are stories with people even learning how to code on pen and paper, then going and just absolutely massacring people in coding competitions, which is absolutely incredible. And top right, I have an example of some of the controls that the international organizations recommend. So this is kind of where you would start with getting people to a similar margin in order to be kind of sort of secure. And then it's up to them at that point. But that is about my presentation. I do apologize immensely for all the technical aspects, the outages, and we're gonna just go ahead and pin that on Spectrum.
Hey, no worry about those outages, man. We're all here, been through it all, especially this last year with all this COVID, but no worries. You did a great job, Kyle. So let's go through some of the Q&A. We've got 2 questions. First up to bat is here. What is the data on people without degrees but skilled getting into the large companies or organizations?
I don't necessarily have data, but what I do have is firsthand experience. I know a couple people that, especially at ReliQuest, have associate degrees and certifications, so they're not necessarily overly reliant on a university like USF or UF or UTampa, especially around the Tampa area. But they did an associate's while in high school, and they pursued certifications in order to, again, develop like pragmatic experience in lieu of developing like soft skills, which are always important. But I know one of the people that was in volunteering even at a table, Killian, can tell you guys more about that one.
Well, I can kind of sort of speak specifically to that. I've got a pretty large team here. We've got a bunch of folks that they didn't get a degree. They do have maybe a couple certifications, not many. Most started as high school, very skilled, and they're not having any luck applying for positions out there. So that's why that question was asked. But
well, it's also getting immensely competitive nowadays, and that's why a lot of the companies are looking for certifications. And you even if you don't necessarily have the funding and the budget to go for some of the certifications, like I know Security Plus, Network Plus can be kind of costly, especially a lot of the SAAS certs. You have companies like Attack IQ doing like the free certifications now, which show nothing but drive that you actually want to grow and learn in your industry, which I'm sure will speak volumes on a resume.
Awesome. All right. Next question here. In your opinion, do you think that it would benefit the developed nations to help developing nations to better secure their infrastructure systems?
Yes. Yeah. So that was more along the point. I'm sorry if that was rather obscure, if that's what I was trying to get to. But on this last slide, on this last slide where I was talking about the international organizations like the UN, their Office of Counterterrorism is where some of the more developed countries like Saudi Arabia and Europe, and I know United States even donated like a couple $1 million towards this. This is a fund alone for helping some of those other nations kind of get up to par. Of course, it's not incredibly easy for them to develop technologies in like a year or so. But that being said, whenever they get up to speed, you now have a shot at your GDP, because like you have software as a service products. They don't necessarily require tons of amounts of natural rich resources. Like you don't necessarily have to be a country that's rich in diamonds or gold to make an impact in the world now. That can be your route to success in the 21st century as an organization.
All right, here's the curveball, Kyle. You ready for this?
Yeah.
Where do you get your ice cream, and what's your favorite flavor?
Where do I get my ice cream? We have a place in Tampa. It is absolutely phenomenal. It's the best ice cream I've ever had. It's off of Florida. It's called Revolution Ice Cream Company. They have a cinnamon swirl flavor that has like hardened icing on top of it. Absolutely phenomenal.
All right, and here's for the last question of the day, unless anyone else throws up any other questions. But what certification degrees would you suggest for those that are not certified? What type of a progression path would you suggest?
Okay. I am not as active in security as I used to be, since I'm more of in the software engineering side. But even I am pursuing, as we speak, Security Plus and the junior pen test cert. And especially if penetration testing is something you're immensely passionate about. I have tons and tons and tons of coworkers who rave about how much experience and knowledge that they've gained alone from the offensive security, the OSCP cert, whatever the acronym actually stands for. I have a friend that sat for it, who is a software engineer, and he said it's all about perspective, and it helped him think critically in CTFs just by going through all the training in the labs that cert requires. So I'd recommend all of the Security Plus, Network Plus, OSCP, and then the EJPT.
Well, Kyle, those are all the questions. Thank you so much for your time. Did an amazing job, even though we've had some issues with the spectrum.
Yeah.
You did an amazing job. Thank you so much. And hey, for those of you that are still out there, if you still have some specific questions for Kyle, please ask him. He'll be out there on the platform. He'll be more than thrilled to answer those questions for you. So we're actually leaving this session 20 minutes early. So get out to those tables, mix and mingle, and enjoy the remainder of the conference, folks.
And feel free to reach out on LinkedIn. Feel free, even if it's not on this platform. You had a question a couple days ago. So, all right. Have a great one, everyone.